Hello, good morning. You know, it's often said that no matter where we live, America, Australia, New Zealand, England, and parts of Europe, they're all lovely places to live in. There's always good and bad locations. But here in the Philippines, it's so important that if you're deciding to contemplate the idea of living here permanently, that you find a place that you feel connected, a feeling of waking up each morning and saying, wow, I'm so lucky. Because if you don't find that place of peace in your heart, really, it's sort of it's hard to define. Then you're always going to be restless. You're always going to be wanting to be somewhere else. And that's the last thing you want here, on your own, here in the Philippines. You may well have found somebody that you can live with, someone that gives you a feeling of peace. But of course, there'll always be ups and downs that affect that normality each day. That's just life. But many of you, and I do say many of you, but a proportionate amount seems to be spoken about how Americans come here. They leave their country and they expect a certain amount of something here in the Philippines. They expect their Starbucks, they expect their T-bone steak, their familiar products. And if they don't find them or they find it hard to get, they lose confidence in the idea of living here in the Philippines. To me, that is just a reluctance to adapt, to look at changing one's way of thinking. Of course, it's always said also that we'll never change the Philippines. You know, how many times have you heard foreigners talking either on videos or maybe in conversations? I know many who say, oh, that bloody this and that bloody that. And really, you can't go through life complaining. We have an expression in Australia. So many English people used to come to England, and they come from England, and they arrive in Australia. And all they do is whinge, complain, whinge. They used to call them whinging Poms. Poms coming from the saying, prisoner of Mother England. And it's so true. So many do. I can recall an event, I can't remember what year it was, but it was many, many decades ago. An English family arrived from, I will say, Manchester or Birmingham, up north somewhere anyway, north of London. And they came as almost like £10 Poms. They decided to emigrate. They bought their ticket, they had their visas or whatever, and they arrived. I believe they arrived in Melbourne. And it was stinking hot day, humidity high, and they probably said to themselves, kids, mum, what have we done? When they arrived. And within hours, they were trying to book a fare back to England. Of course, England was a better place then. But it nevertheless represents a rash decision, one that where they hopped on the plane, no thought of what Australia was going to be like. They probably left, if it was warm and hot like that, it would have been towards the start of winter in England. So for them, they were going to this country with sunshine and warmth. They knew that, but they came and they whinged and they went. Bye-bye, pommies. Well, isn't it a bit like that? We keep seeing these sad tales. A lot of English people in at the moment, and also a lot of Americans, in a situation of literally homelessness here in Manila, parts of Cebu. To get yourself to the point where you have nothing, to be living on a piece of cardboard in the street, outside maybe a 7-Eleven or a pharmacy, begging for money, that would be a dreadful way to end the dream. You have to ask yourself that if you get to that point, are you maybe a little bit mentally also at an edge? In other words, you're not able to cope with catastrophe. You're not able to pick yourself up anymore in the world. The knowledge is that I could have nothing. Might not have a place to sleep tonight. But does that mean that I would become homeless? Maybe for a few days I might have to wait till my pension arrived, if that were the case. If I had nothing and I had no money in reserve, and I only had my pension, the one thing that I would hold on to is the knowledge of my pension coming in every 4 weeks. At least then I could pick myself up, step by step, inch by inch. But nevertheless, that was my safety net. But for many, they come and they find themselves no passport, haven't been able to renew one's visa in many cases because they've got themselves in such a mess for such a long time, a relationship breakdown. You know, it's hard enough dealing with a relationship that's gone sour. But to deal with it here in the Philippines, it's even harder. You live in a bubble of fear and the unknown. Where am I going now? What am I going to do next? Because everything you've become used to in that relationship around you, a home, a place to rent, has all gone pear-shaped. So that's why you find yourself in such a dilemma. If you add to it, there was a terrible case, I think he was American. And the lady, the alleged lady, did a runner eventually to Australia, I believe. How she did that, I don't know. Maybe she had a visa or a citizenship to do that. But she took him for everything. And not only that, she destroyed all of his documents. The first thing I would be doing, I'd walk if I had to my own embassy and ask for help. Get an emergency passport sorted. Get it sorted with BI. Let them know what was happening. Because they will give you time to sort out your affairs. You have to keep a record of your bank. You have to have something. And it has to be here. You know, I can log on to my bank at any point, anywhere. Go to a computer and log on. I can tell the bank that my card has been stolen. I have friends who the card can be sent to, replacement, urgently. And they, I know, would send it to me courier. Even if they sent it care of somebody I know still here, it would arrive. TNT or whatever they call themselves. And it might take a few days, a few weeks, but I could get back on my feet very easily. But for so many, the world is becoming so difficult to get things done online, even though they're there to help you and make things more efficient. Things like getting cards sent from certain banks. You would think it would be so easy for them to courier it to you and take the courier charge out of your account. But no, they want an address or somewhere that they can send it within the country they're in. They need a phone number that is local for them. It is a pain in the ass, but these things you've got to have in the back of your mind. You have an emergency plan. Somebody has got to hold this. I can remember, oh my God, I had a wife that was crazy. Mind you, I was crazy marrying her in the first place. I think we were both too crazies at the time. She ended up cutting up my suits. I couldn't believe that she did that. But people will do these things. And as a result, you'll find yourself in crazy land now and again. So guys, you need disaster relief. You need disaster plans. Forget about your plan B, C, D. Worry about having an immediate recovery plan. Because if you don't have that, you're going to be like so many people who come here with dreams of making a go at the place. Completely crazy plans, crazy ideas. You can't come to a country 6,000 or 8,000 k's away from your home with just a few dollars in your pocket and think that you're going to survive. You won't get work online. Yes, you might, but you won't guarantee it. You can't come here on a visitor's visa, a tourist visa, and expect to work. You're not allowed to. You can't even volunteer work here. So come at least with a plan. It's a bit like a business plan. You have to do a business plan to retire anywhere in the world. You have to look at a feasibility study. I know it sounds a bit like Welcome to Us channel with all his spreadsheets, but there's a certain amount of truth in what he says, as much as he knows everything. I don't know anything, but all I do know is a little bit of common sense. Guys, it's okay to dream. It's okay to wander your fingers across a keyboard and dream of living in a Pacific Island nation. But that only exists on the eastern side. On the western, it's the South China Sea or the West Philippine Sea. But guys, seriously, don't come to the Philippines unless you're prepared to change. You are never going to change them. Stop bitching, stop moaning, stop all of that. That will not get you 1 centimeter forward. All it'll do is put up the backs of people around you, including other foreigners. We don't want to hear you moaning about how this is no good here or that is no good here. It's a great place to live. It's a great place once you start to understand how it works. You cannot pull a watch apart unless you know how to put it back together again. Otherwise, what's the point of pulling it apart in the first place? You want to end up with a working, operating system. And it'll only operate if you're prepared to look around at how the system works here and adapt to it. It's not going to adapt to you. You have to adapt to it. That's my thought for the day. Bye now.